For more than 2 centuries, one question has divided historians, physicians, and forensic investigators alike. Did Napoleon Bonaparte die from a natural illness? Or was one of history's greatest military leaders quietly poisoned during his final years in exile? Our investigation begins on one of the most isolated islands on Earth. Far from the battlefields that made him famous, Napoleon spent his final years on Saint Helena, a place chosen not for comfort, but because escape seemed impossible. Longwood House became the last residence of an emperor who had once ruled much of Europe. Surrounded by harsh weather, endless ocean, and constant surveillance, these quiet rooms would soon become the center of one of history's most enduring mysteries. As the months passed, those closest to Napoleon noticed a gradual decline in his health. His energy faded, his appetite changed, and periods of discomfort became increasingly frequent. But were these simply the signs of illness, or the first indications of something far more sinister? Rumors began almost immediately after his death. Some believed Napoleon had not died naturally at all. Instead, they suspected a carefully planned poisoning carried out so slowly that it would leave behind more questions than answers. Official records told a very different story. Physicians who examined Napoleon documented extensive disease affecting his stomach, leading many historians to conclude that natural illness, not murder, had ended his life. But was the official explanation complete? Decades later, an unexpected piece of evidence reignited the debate.
This isn't just a relic of the past. It's the key to the entire conspiracy. Proof that he was murdered.
Preserved locks of Napoleon's hair, carefully authenticated and studied by scientists, offered investigators something no witness or diary ever could: physical evidence that could still be tested. Modern laboratories discovered measurable amounts of arsenic within those historic hair samples. To many people, the conclusion seemed obvious. Arsenic meant poison. Poison meant murder. But in forensic science, the first answer is rarely the correct one. Before reaching any conclusion, investigators asked a more important question.
It was once the color of high fashion.
Where else could arsenic have come from? In the 19th century, this chemical was far more common than most people today would ever imagine. So our investigation begins exactly where every good forensic case should, with evidence instead of assumptions. Hair samples, medical reports, eyewitness accounts, and modern toxicology will now be examined together to determine which explanation best survives scientific scrutiny. Napoleon's condition continued to worsen over time. Those who lived beside him described increasing weakness, recurring stomach pain, and long periods of exhaustion. Yet none of these symptoms by themselves could distinguish between poisoning and a serious disease. Fortunately, this case offers something many ancient investigations never do: medical records. Napoleon's physicians documented his condition with remarkable detail, creating a timeline that still allows modern researchers to examine his final illness nearly 2 centuries later. Following Napoleon's death, an official autopsy was performed in the presence of several witnesses.
Significant trauma was observed in the thoracic cavity. The parchment bears the official seal of the examiner. Remains inconsistent with the initial claims.
The examination described extensive disease affecting the stomach, a finding that immediately became the foundation of the natural death explanation. But as history would later prove, the story was far from over. More than a century later, a completely different line of evidence emerged. Preserved strands of Napoleon's hair were subjected to modern scientific analysis, allowing investigators to search for chemical traces that could never have been detected in 1821. The laboratory results quickly captured worldwide attention. Detectable levels of arsenic were found within the hair samples. For many observers, the implication seemed obvious. If arsenic was present, then someone must have poisoned him. But forensic science demands a far more careful approach. Finding a substance inside the body is only the beginning of an investigation, not the end. The crucial questions are how much was present when the exposure occurred and whether those levels are actually consistent with deliberate poisoning. Researchers expanded the investigation by examining additional authenticated hair samples collected from different periods of Napoleon's life. If arsenic appeared only during his exile, the poisoning theory would gain strength. But if similar levels existed earlier, the case would become far more complicated. The results challenged one of the investigation's biggest assumptions. Several authenticated samples from years before Saint Helena also contained elevated arsenic levels. Suddenly, the evidence no longer pointed toward a single moment in time. It suggested a much longer history of exposure. This discovery forced investigators to ask an entirely different question. Could arsenic have been entering Napoleon's body through ordinary 19th century life rather than through a carefully planned act of murder? To answer that, we must first understand the world in which he lived. During the early 19th century, arsenic appeared in places most people would never suspect. It could be found in medicines, pigments, wallpaper, cosmetics, and even household materials. Before we accuse an assassin, we must determine whether the environment itself could explain the evidence. Modern toxicology begins not with assumptions, but with measurement. Scientists carefully analyzed authenticated strands of Napoleon's hair, using techniques capable of detecting even the smallest traces of chemical elements. The question was no longer whether arsenic was present, but what those measurements actually meant. The results produced an unexpected pattern. Hair collected from different periods of Napoleon's life showed remarkably similar arsenic concentrations. If the poisoning had begun only during his exile on Saint Helena, investigators would have expected a dramatic increase. Instead, the evidence suggested a much longer history of exposure. This single discovery transformed the investigation. If comparable arsenic levels existed years before Napoleon ever reached Saint Helena, then the presence of arsenic alone could no longer be treated as proof of deliberate poisoning. The mystery had become far more complicated than it first appeared. To understand these findings, investigators turned to the 19th century itself. During Napoleon's lifetime, arsenic was surprisingly common. It appeared in pigments, wallpapers, medicines, cosmetics, textiles, and numerous household products that people encountered almost every day. What seems alarming today was not necessarily unusual 200 years ago. Long-term exposure to small amounts of arsenic could occur without any criminal intent. This possibility forced investigators to consider whether the chemical evidence reflected murder or simply the environment in which Napoleon lived. With toxicology alone unable to provide a definitive answer, the investigation shifted toward medicine. If poisoning could not fully explain the evidence, perhaps Napoleon's documented symptoms would reveal a different story. The original medical records suddenly became more important than ever. Investigators reopened the official autopsy report with fresh eyes. Rather than relying on 19th century interpretations alone, modern forensic pathologists compared every surviving observation with current medical knowledge. The goal was not to rewrite history, but to understand it more accurately. Several findings described in the autopsy appeared strikingly consistent with advanced gastric disease. Although medicine has evolved enormously since 1821, many physical signs recorded by Napoleon's physicians remain recognizable to specialists today. The historical evidence began aligning with modern pathology. Another important clue emerged from Napoleon's family history. Historical records indicate that serious gastric illnesses affected several close relatives. While heredity alone proves nothing, it provides investigators with an alternative explanation that deserves the same careful consideration as every other piece of evidence. By this stage, the investigation had taken an unexpected turn. The hair samples had raised the possibility of poisoning, but the broader evidence was beginning to point elsewhere. Toxicology, pathology, historical testimony, and family history would now have to be evaluated together before any conclusion could responsibly be reached. At this stage, the investigation is no longer about isolated clues. Every surviving source must now be considered together. Medical records, eyewitness testimony, toxicology reports, family history, and the official autopsy all become pieces of a much larger puzzle. Forensic investigations rarely rely on a single discovery. Instead, investigators look for consistency across independent sources. The strongest explanation is the one that continues to fit as more evidence is added, not the one supported by a single dramatic finding. Napoleon's documented symptoms were carefully compared with modern clinical knowledge. Their progression appeared gradual rather than sudden, developing over months instead of days. That pattern would become an important factor. in evaluating both competing theories. Investigators then asked a critical question. If deliberate arsenic poisoning had occurred, would the medical evidence be expected to look different? Modern toxicology allows researchers to compare historical descriptions with the physiological effects typically associated with significant arsenic exposure. The comparison revealed something important. While traces of arsenic were undeniably present, the overall medical record did not clearly reflect the pattern expected from fatal arsenic poisoning. Instead, many observations appeared more compatible with a progressive illness developing over a considerable period of time. Attention returned once again to the official autopsy. Although performed in 1821, many of its observations remain medically meaningful today. Modern forensic pathologists have repeatedly noted that several recorded findings closely resemble advanced gastric disease. Investigators also considered Napoleon's family history. Reports of serious stomach illnesses among close relatives cannot determine the cause of his death on their own, but they do strengthen the possibility that hereditary disease played an important role in his final years. One by one, the competing explanations were tested against every available source. Whenever a theory failed to account for multiple independent observations, its explanatory strength weakened. The investigation was no longer asking which idea sounded more dramatic, it was asking which one explained the greatest number of verified facts. As the evidence accumulated, a remarkable pattern began to emerge. Historical testimony, medical documentation, forensic pathology, and modern toxicology no longer appeared to contradict one another. Instead, they increasingly pointed toward the same underlying explanation. After 2 centuries of speculation, the investigation has reached its final stage. Every major claim has been examined, every surviving document has been tested. Only one question now remains. Which explanation is best supported by the totality of the evidence? We have now reached the final stage of the investigation. Every major source has been examined. The eyewitness accounts, physician journals, autopsy findings, toxicology reports, environmental research, and family history are no longer separate pieces of evidence. Together, they tell one increasingly coherent story. No single document can solve a 200-year-old mystery on its own. But when independent sources begin pointing in the same direction, confidence grows. In forensic investigations, conclusions are built not upon certainty, but upon the cumulative weight of consistent evidence. The presence of arsenic can no longer be viewed in isolation. Toxicological studies suggest that measurable arsenic exposure was not unusual during Napoleon's lifetime. The critical question, therefore, is not whether arsenic existed, but whether it explains the totality of the evidence better than any alternative. When Napoleon's documented symptoms, the original autopsy observations, and contemporary medical knowledge are considered together, they form a pattern that appears remarkably consistent with advanced gastric disease. While no historical diagnosis can ever be absolute, the medical evidence points with increasing clarity toward a natural illness. This does not erase the poisoning theory. It remains an important chapter in the investigation and helped inspire decades of scientific research. But the strongest theories are those that continue to withstand new evidence. And in this case, many of the original assumptions have become increasingly difficult to support. History rarely provides perfect answers. The passage of time removes witnesses, destroys evidence, and leaves investigators with incomplete records. Our responsibility is not to eliminate uncertainty, but to follow the evidence as honestly and objectively as possible. Based on the surviving historical testimony, the official autopsy, authenticated hair analyses, environmental arsenic research, and modern forensic pathology, our investigation reaches its conclusion. The balance of evidence supports the explanation that Napoleon most likely died from a progressive natural disease rather than deliberate arsenic poisoning. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this case is not about Napoleon alone. It reminds us that history is never frozen in time. Every generation gains new scientific tools, allowing old mysteries to be examined with fresh eyes and greater precision than ever before. Case summary: 1 emperor, 2 centuries of debate, authenticated hair samples, an official autopsy, modern toxicology, contemporary forensic pathology. While some uncertainty will always remain, the available evidence today most strongly supports death by natural disease. Case closed. The file is now sealed, but history still holds countless unanswered questions. Hidden inside forgotten archives, weathered battlefields, and ancient manuscripts are mysteries waiting to be reopened. Until the next investigation, this is history's footnote. History isn't just remembered, it is investigated.